and welcome back to Pittsburgh, in particular Wilkinsburg, because we are in one of my favorite places, a little shop called Lovett Sundries. Now that's interesting because my last name also happens to be Lovett. This is the shop that my brother Jeff and his wife Marit have essentially built from the ground up. I am insanely proud of what they've managed to build here. It's just epic. So before we get into the topic of today's video, I do want to take a minute to show you guys around what they've got going on here, because this is a really cool place. They make a ton of excellent products. I mean, you can see a lot of them behind me here. They've got face creams, face oils, deodorants, soaps, a really amazing cast iron skillet conditioner. And some of the machinery they use to make this stuff is really epic. I actually was lucky enough to watch them make some of the rosewater face cream that they were making this time, and they have this like really cool machine with a lot of very interesting pneumatics that pushes the cream into the glass jars that they ultimately send out. And it was just really a lot of fun to watch that machine go off. Someday I'll get a whole lot of footage of all the different machines they have in here, because they got a lot of really cool stuff. But everything here is built to be as clean and natural as possible and totally recyclable. And I think this place is really cool. It's kind of my home away from home, but that raises the big question of why am I away from home? And well, one of the big reasons was to actually come visit my brother, and I want you guys to do the same thing. I put all of his information below, so check out his shop and come visit his shop in person if you're in the area. But also I had some other things on the docket, and one of the big items was to fix the desk system Centurion that's hanging out in Cincinnati. Now, Cincinnati and Wilkinsburg are not the same place, but there's only about 4.5 hours separating them. So it made sense to hit up Cincinnati on my trip up here to visit my brother. So I really wanted to get that desk system going, but why is there a Centurion Desk System in Cincinnati? And more importantly, what is in Cincinnati? Well, there's a school out there called Butler Tech, and this is a high school, and it's actually like really great. It's a lot better than the high school that I went to, but Butler Tech is an amazing high school with a awesome collection of courses set up to help kids learn like important skills. They've got an excellent machine shop, an auto shop, and they even have an IT shop. And we actually saw a post on Twitter a couple years ago from Butler Tech's IT department showing a Centurion Desk System. This is an incredibly rare system that we'd never come across. Had a full CPU 5 in it and a hawk drive bolted to the bottom of the desk. And so we were really excited, and we wanted to get it going, and I reached out to Butler Tech and I got in touch with Mr. Hall, and Mr. Hall of course is an absolute legend, and he invited me out to come and check out Butler Tech, but also work on that Centurion and hopefully get it up and running. And we didn't get there. There were just a few too many hurdles to tackle in just one day. So I brought the CPU 5 computer and backplane and card cage home with me, along with one of the platters, and we did some pretty interesting digging into it. And we found that it still had an operating system, and it still had a bunch of software, and I am not quite ready to let go of that CPU 5. But I just so happen to have two CPU 6s and a hawk drive with a CPU 6 operating system installed in it. So I loaded an entire card cage full of CPU 6 equipment, and I loaded up my good hawk, and I set off back towards Cincinnati to hopefully get that system going. So we still got quite a lot of work ahead of us, so let's just hop into it, and hopefully it goes smoothly. And hello again, old friend. It's good to see you. We got a lot of work to do on you today, so I hope you're ready. First things first, let's get this terminal out of the way. We're going to be coming back to it later after we know for sure that the computer itself works, kind of dealing with one unknown at a time. Then I need to slide the whole desk out so I can move around and get to the backside of it. And it's very heavy, especially with the hawk drive still hanging out on the bottom side of it. But next I want to get that hawk drive itself out, and I'm going to enlist the help of my good buddy Valo, who was helping me last time, and he has since graduated from Butler Tech, but he came back today just to help me out. So thank you so much, man. With the old drive out of the way, we'll lift the new drive into place, and it's really super fiddly to get a 140 pound or 64 kilogram hard drive into place without breaking anything, but we got there. And once in place, we'll lock it down with the 2 screws on the side. I also need to switch over the front plates since the blue won't look right on the desk system and the white won't look right on my system. So it's just 4 bolts, 2 on each side and 1 bolt on the bottom, and then they swap over easy peasy. Next, I'll get the front panel switches in, and interestingly, Centurion cut a hole out in the metal of the desk specifically for this, but I would have to remove the wood top first to access it. So I'll just climb into the hole that the Hawk lives in to do it that way instead. Next, let's get the card cage into place, and of course I set it in there backwards, so I had to go back and flip it around. The front of the card should face forward towards the front of the desk, and the back plane faces towards the back of the desk. And the power supply is interestingly a much smaller unit, but it is made by the same company, Rio Power Systems. With the harness plugged into the front, I'll get to work screwing down the power wires into the right places. I, of course, checked the voltages with the power supply fully disconnected first, then I went back and checked them again on the back plane with all the cards removed. I wanted to be absolutely sure that we wouldn't fry anything on accident. But now that we know that the power is good, let's get all the cables hooked up, starting with the front panel ribbon cable. Then I'll snake the CPU ribbon cable through the open slot out towards the front and ultimately plug that into the CPU. And now it's time for a test. I've got the laptop set up with TerraTerm as an emulated terminal, and what we're looking for here is error to let us know that the bootstrap ROM is working. And excellent, that means that everything is working correctly. The computer's actually working. So let's work on getting that Hawk drive up. I'll pull it out and lock it in place in the service position, and thankfully the table is heavy enough that it doesn't tip when it's in this position. Then I'll remove the 2 screws and pull off the top cover, but the table is so tightly designed that I can't actually pull it up or forwards. So instead I just pushed it backwards, and I'll circle around and grab it in a second. The heads were already locked and unplugged. I just wanted to be doubly sure, and now that I am, let's spin it up and spin purge it for a while. Everyone seems to have a different idea of how long you should let a drive spin purge for, but I've found that about 30 minutes seems to work just fine. So after a half hour, I'll spin it back down, unlock the heads, and plug them back in. Then comes the moment of truth. It's spun up, and after an agonizing 50 seconds, the heads have loaded, and I didn't hear anything untoward, so let's hit the select button and try to load into the OS. Error. Okay, maybe it's trying to boot from the removable platter. I'll use my screwdriver to press the RF button to tell it to boot from the fixed platter, and press the select button one more time, and awesome, into the name equals prompt. That's good. I'll type @OS_in, and there we go, booting into the OS. That's the greeting message that we programmed in the last episode. This is excellent. After a short wait, it asks for the date and time, so I'll just punch in today's date, 08/23/84. There we go, CRT0 ready. Let's run a .sta, and it's working perfectly. The display looks so funky though because TerraTerm is atrocious when in full screen mode like this. So let's get the proper ads Regent 40 terminal set up and see it running like it's supposed to. So I'll spin the Hawk down and drop the ads terminal back into its rightful place. And it was at this point I realized we didn't have the right cable. RS-232 cabling issues. What a surprise. Thankfully, I brought a spare cable. It just needed to be resoldered correctly. So I looked up the pinout of the MUX on Meisaka's excellently reverse engineered schematic, and I got the new cable made up correctly. So with the new cable plugged in, let's flip the terminal on and wait for it to slowly warm up, and it looks like we've got a nice strong picture. That's actually better than my ads Regent 40. I'll press the select button and error. That's awesome. That means that the cable is working, so I did my soldering correctly. So let's go for a full boot now. I'll turn the power on, hit the start button on the Hawk, and wait a minute, the Hawk is illuminating the fault light and the start button doesn't do anything. And the room is starting to smell suspiciously like burned electronics. That's not good. So after a look inside, this power transistor on the Hawk appears to have let the magic smoke out. What terrible timing. But let's get this power supply board out of there at least. It's just a ribbon cable and 4 screws, and then it can be lifted up and off of the connector. It's really frustrating because this worked so well for so long. But anyways, this connector goes to the power transistor board underneath, which thankfully looks good. So I'll remove the power supply board off of the other Hawk drive as its transistor still looks good. And again, it's just 4 screws, disconnect, and then move it over to the failed Hawk and start screwing it all back together. And well, now we're up to the moment of truth again. The fault light is off. That's good news. Let's spin it up. The 50 seconds of agony comes once again as I wait out the Hawk's power-up cycle. Eventually the heads load and I hit the select button, get to the name equals prompt, then type in @OSN to tell it to start loading the operating system. After around another 10 seconds, it asks me for the current date and time, but by getting this far, it's already excellent news. It means we've averted another disaster and the OPSIS boots up perfectly and we're good to go. And then it all worked perfectly and I am a genius. No, you're not a genius? Huh? What's that? Dude, I was there. I saw what happened. What are you talking about? You immediately broke it after it was up and running. Dude, they don't need to know about that. Go on, tell the people how you broke it. I'm not going to tell them about how it all went wrong. All right, fine. I did immediately break it after it was up and running. So let me walk you through exactly what went wrong. We had the Hawk drive fully spun up and it was working 100% perfectly in the operating system. I could do a .sta and see the status. And it worked right up until I tried to create a new file using a CED or Centurion editor. And the moment it tried to create that, it gave me a disk fail error. That is not good. You never want to see a disk fail error when you're working with a Hawk drive from the 1970s. I was really perplexed by this and I started messing around with it a little more and I got even more confused because we could still use the operating system. We could still do directory listings of folders just fine, but where I tried to create the new file, which was in root, now the directory listing of root was failing. I had somehow managed to corrupt the file system, but not so far that the operating system was no longer operational. So what happened? Well, it turns out that the 50-pin cable that connects the Hawk to the disk controller card had been misplaced throughout the last 6 months, and I had brought a backup with me in case of just such an event, and so I used the backup 50-pin cable, but that cable was an untested cable, and it has a break internally on pin 50. I found this out when I pulled the cable off and I started measuring them out. Now, a break in one wire could mean a lot of things, but for us, pin 50 just so happens to be the combined write data. I thought that once the drive came up and we were booted into the operating system, that meant that the cable was good. And it is good, 99% of it is fine. But when we tried to create a new file, the operating system told the disk to erase that particular sector, which it did successfully, and then it tried to send combined write data back out to the disk, but because there's a break in the wire, it never made it, and it never wrote down any new data. So we just blew a hole in the middle of our file system by having a broken wire on our 50-pin cable. So how do we fix it? Well, normally this is a really easy problem to fix. You just replace the 50-pin cable, which we're going to have to do, and you slap a removable platter with the operating system on it, do a copy from that down to the fixed platter again, and you're back up and running. The only problem is that this particular hawk drive is the hawk drive that we repaired that didn't have enough heads. So it is a fixed platter only hawk drive. And 95% of the time, that is not a problem. I've had this up to several shows and it's worked perfectly. 5 megabytes is more than enough space to do anything you ever want to do on this system, unless you want to do real legitimate accounting from the 1970s. But, well, the other 5% of the time when that's a problem is when you need to get something onto that platter, particularly the operating system. Now, originally I did this with the FFC and the floppy drive, and that's probably the best way for us to fix this because the hardware is all working 100% perfectly. The only problem with that is that I don't have the FFC and floppy disk with me. And so we kind of had to call it here. I really hate leaving things unfinished, and this is unfinished. So in the future, I am going to fly back and we're going to get this machine working 100% perfectly. So the question is, am I going to fly back with the FFC and floppy in tow, or am I going to fly back and use some other method to bring the operating system back onto that drive? Now that is the really interesting part, because that is actually what I want to do. There's only 2 known FFC cards. I have one and Aaron has the other in the MicroPlus and Tennessee. So I would really like to develop a way for the students at Butler Tech to recover the system or add files to the system without needing a removable platter. And that limits us to serial communication. And transferring files over serial communication is not unheard of. X modem and Y modem, and there are several other serial communication protocols. There just aren't any for the Centurion. So that's what we're going to start developing. We're going to work on maybe trying to port X modem over to the Centurion so we can send the files or even send entire platter images so that not just me, anybody, any of the students at Butler Tech can restore the fixed platter system. So that's the goal. We didn't quite get there in this episode, but what that means is that there's going to be more on the desk system coming in the future. So if you are a high school student and looking for a good high school, or if you're a parent and have a kid who's coming up to high school, check out Butler Tech. Otherwise, check out Lovett Sundries. They have an excellent collection of stuff. And I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next episode.